first great flowering in Zora Neale Hurston's career coincided with the Harlem Renaissance, that 1920s golden age of African-American creative expression. At last, Black literature, music, art, and politics no longer dealt in apology or defeat, but in assertion and pride. In this creative outpouring, as in so much else, Hurston was the exception. She didn't care a fig whether her work showed Black people in a favorable or unfavorable light. All she wanted was to tell the truth as lyrically as she could, and not everybody would thank her for that. Her biographer, Robert Hemingway, calls her a woman of fierce independence, who was a complex woman with a high tolerance of contradiction. In African-American terms, she was skilled in the art of masking, distinguishing her inner life for her own purposes. And now, Zora Neale Hurston. Good afternoon, Ms. Hurston.
Good afternoon to you as well, Ms. Mountin.
Tell the interviewers a little bit about yourself.
My name is Nora Neale Hurston. I was born in Alabama on January 15, 1891. I'm a novelist and an artist. I believe in an equal world where, despite the color of your skin or your sex, you have the capacity to do anything in the world.
You were involved in a group called the Guerrilla Girls, correct?
Yes.
What exactly is the large-scale objective of Guerrilla Girls?
Guerrilla Girls is a group of female artists, writers, and performers, and other art professionals who fight discrimination through humor, activism, and the arts. We are involved in many projects concerning the institution of racism and sexism.
Do you remember the project you did work?
No, I would have been one of those people who would want it to stay with the art world. That we began to talk about the army and women in the army and services and things like that, trying to think of other out of the art world things. I was not interested in doing that because as artists always know what's going on worldwide. But it seemed to me what was needed was real artwork in the real art world. And we didn't do that. We didn't finish it. We got off path and we didn't nail it. We didn't nail it.
How do you feel with the anonymity of your work as a guerrilla girl in terms of the fact that people in the art world might not know that you produce less because they didn't know what you were doing with the rest of your time, or if the Guerrilla Girls' work impacted your own personal work but you couldn't talk about that, or how it would be in the future when your biography is examined? At any point, how does anonymity work, and is it a problem?
No, I don't think it's a problem. I'm pretty outspoken in my work. In historical terms, when you look back at some of the women painters in the 14th and 15th century, we didn't know what they did, but you could see, I think, and looking at my work, that I was always critical about that thing and the other thing. And I don't feel that I need the girls to have anything to do with my work. My work was always going to be what it was. Because being a Black woman in the art world is it's really, really hard. I integrated a Black male artist group, and that was the hardest thing I ever did. Being a girl was a piece of cake compared to being assured what kind of art you make. It will be feminist. Not being stuck in a tenure teaching position. Seeing your ideas live in the work of others. Having the opportunity to choose between career and motherhood. Not having to choke on those big cigars or paint Italian suits. Having more time to work after your mate dumps you for someone younger. Being included in revised versions of art history. Not having to undergo the embarrassment of being called genius, getting your picture in art magazines wearing a gorilla suit. That was beauty, and that was in 1988.
You often use slang in your novels for a more realistic tone, despite others believing it isn't the correct approach. Why is that?
I felt like I was the only Black Southerner, who truly loved her Blackness and her Southernness. The other people sometimes felt it wasn't quite the right thing, and people should really be speaking standard English. But it upset them. I just threw all the caution in the wind and said, gee, I like these people, I like the way they sound. If other people think we're ignorant and backward because we sound this way, they obviously don't know our history and why we sound this way. And I like the people themselves, so I'm going to present them in their complexity and completeness and their fullness and their richness and their contrariness. And that's what you get.
The whole dense texture of African-American folklore and the way that Black people interact with each other verbally interest you greatly as you express in your writing. Why is that?
I'm interested in what I call Negro farthest down. That's my phrase. And what I'm really interested in depicting Black difference. As an anthropologist, as a storyteller, and as a playwright, I want to show that Black culture in the world onto its own and actually very, very different from white culture.
Thank you for your time today, Ms. Hurston.
Thank you. Gene Toomer received much acclaim for his portrait of African-American life in the early 20th century and in his 1923 book, King. The Harlem Renaissance author wrote vivid vignettes in a series of poems and short stories in the book. The next week, the book will be re-released with an introduction written by Harvard scholar Henry Louis Gates and Emory University scholar Rutherford Beard. In its 70-page introduction, the two scholars wrote that Toomer, a light-skinned Black man of mixed heritage, chose to live his life as more of a black man passing as white. NPR's Robert Siegel talks with Beard about the life of Toomer. Professor Beard, welcome to the program.
Oh, Mr. Siegel, it's a pleasure to be with you.
And your conclusions are based on both facts and reading those facts. First, what did you find out?
Oh, the newly unearthed facts are in census records. There's a draft registration, and his marriage license. The census records list Toomer as white. The draft registrations record Toomer as Negro, and then the marriage license lists both the bride and groom as white. What is fascinating about these findings is that, first of all, this is information that has been overlooked, and so it adds an important dimension to the long speculation about Toomer's racial ancestry, which really began with the publication of Cain in 1923.
Now, Toomer, in writings, distances himself from the label Negro.
Yes.
But did he speak lots of different blood and flowed in his veins?
Yes.
But did he speak a lot? And he described himself as somebody who spent some years of his life, as they said in the day, in colored schools.
Yes.
And many years living as white. Is that accurate in his description about how he grew up? Accurate?
It is, and it isn't. He did attend Henry Highland Garnet School, which was a black school. He did attend Paul Laurence Dunbar High School, which was a black school.
These were in Washington, D.C.?
These were in Washington, D.C. And so he lived his life, the early part of his life, in a white community in Washington, D.C. But he attended schools that were black. And these important autobiographical facts point to the world in which Toomer lived. That is, he lived in a black world, except for that period when he was living in New Rochelle, New York. He lived in a black world.
So when he wrote in draft of an unpublished autobiography?
Yes.
That I'm quoting right now, when he entered college, 14 years of my life I'd lived in a white group, 4 years I'd lived in a colored group.
Yes.
That's almost the reverse of what the actual numbers were, would you say?
Exactly right. And the position you're quoting from is his racial position, which he formulated in 1914. But it is a position that he reconstructed and wrote about in 1931. He states there, "I am of the human race. I am neither white nor black, but an American." What Professor Gates and I discerned, but trusted, but the new genealogical information is a pattern of ambivalence and then finally denial.
Gene Toomer grew up in a home with his grandmother, who was very well
Yes.
known figure in his time, PBS Pinback.
Yes.
He was the son of white Southerner, that Southerner's former slave, who was a mixed race herself.
Yes.
Became a Union Army soldier in the Civil War, commanding black troops, and then in Reconstruction he was a politician and governor or senator.
Yes.
Toomer reconstructed a claim about his grandfather, Pinback, saying
Yes.
that Pinback, in effect, had passed for black, that he was a white man who passed for black.
Yes, he claimed he had Negro blood. In other words, he positions his grandfather as a kind of opportunist, but not as a person who cared at all about reforming the political and social landscape of Louisiana.
The opportunism would have been the moment of Reconstruction. He would take advantage of being free black men in occupied Louisiana.
Exactly. Toomer does this, as we argue in our introduction, because it was crucial for him to paint the roots of his family tree white.
You and your colleague in this project, Professor Gates, wrote of irony that Gene Toomer initially celebrated as a figure of the Harlem Renaissance. His then interest in him is greatly revived many decades later as a point really of black pride. It's spread once again.
Yes, that's one of the ironies of Toomer's life. So given the fact that Toomer did everything he could to distance himself from the work that linked him to African Americans, a work where he was and would be identified as a Negro or a black writer, he would have been very disturbed, and there is something rather sad and tragic about that choice.
Professor Beard, thank you very much for talking with us today.
It was a pleasure.